Ok. ¿Se oye? ¿Sí? Sí, sí, sí. Sí, sí, sí. Sí, sí, sí. ¿Me oyen? Sí. Sí, sí. Sí, sí. ¿No? ¿Sí? ¿No? ¿Sí? Sí, sí. Muy bien. Whenever you like. Well, 2 minutes. 2 minutes to go, I think. Okay, whenever you like. You say when. You have to wait?
Let me get you some water.
Okay.
Okay. Like for the past speakers, we had the speakers like coming up here, and it sounds like a lot of echo.
Yeah?
Maybe you remain there.
Okay. Ah. More people come in.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for coming to this wonderful plenary. It is my pleasure to introduce Paul Davis to you. He's a good friend, a colleague. It is a pleasure to have you here today. Let me just read a few bio about him. He has an MA in Linguistics from the University of Reading. Paul Davis is currently leading the Make It Real English language teaching project at the Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. So that you know, he worked for 2 years at the British Institute, Madrid, 2 years at the WAF, 25 years at the Anglo-Mexican Foundation in different posts, including Director General, and 15 years with the British Council as teacher trainer and senior consultant. He was a founder, member of Mestizo, and national president. He has given many talks around Mexico and Latin America. He's also the author of many articles about English language teaching. He has co-authored 7 series of EFL textbooks. He has also 4 ELT methodology books, which you can find in our library. Please give him a crowd of applause.
Thank you. Yes, so when I first came to Mexico in 1965, I worked at the UAP for 2 years. And I've given courses at the UAP since then, so I have a connection. I'm here in place of Liliana Sanchez, who had an emergency operation and didn't recover as quickly as she had hoped. And so yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I think it was yesterday, wasn't it? Yesterday, she said she was very sorry she couldn't come. She was still convalescing from her operation. And so I'm giving a talk in place of her, which is quite good because I've worked with Liliana a lot. I worked with her in the Anglo. I worked with her in the British Council. And she went back to the Anglo and became the head of teacher training at the Anglo. And I designed 3 teacher training courses, a basic, intermediate, and advanced level teacher training courses. So we've worked together, and we've worked together on teacher training. So I suppose I'm a fairly good substitute for her. How many of you here are teacher trainers, actual teacher trainers? Quite a lot, quite a lot. How many of you want to be teacher trainers sometime soon? Don't be shy, don't be modest, don't be shy. Generations pass and the old people will leave and we'll need new people coming in to take their place. How many of you are from Puebla? How many of you are from outside Puebla? Anybody from outside Mexico? Right. So we've got quite a good mixture representative of English language teaching and teacher training in the BUAP, in Puebla, around Mexico and beyond. My talk today is ELT methodology and English teacher training. ELT methodology is obviously central to teacher training because in a sense when people come on a training course, we the trainers are saying we will show you, we will teach you, we will train you in how to teach English. And how to teach English is the methodology. So it's central. However, it's quite complex and even controversial English language teaching methodology. Even in medicine, I think medical methodology has its controversies and differences of opinion, etc., but English language teaching possibly more. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's look at the basic contents of English teacher training. Obviously the English language is fundamental. If anybody wants to be an English teacher, they have to have an adequate command of the language and they have to have an understanding of the language. Foreign language learning is obviously fundamental. Teachers have to understand, as far as anybody understands, how people learn languages and also perhaps how people fail to learn languages. Because probably more people fail to learn foreign languages than actually learn foreign languages, wouldn't you say? I mean, if you think of secondary school, all the people who are studying English in secondary school, how many of them fail? Yeah, so I suppose in a sense the teachers are failing as well, aren't they? Approaches, methods and techniques. Materials and aids, which go together with approaches, methods and techniques. I've written many textbooks, and when you're writing a textbook, you're obviously thinking in methodological terms. As time has gone by, textbooks have changed. So back in the 1960s, when I was teaching here, it was audiolingual method. And situational language teaching, the textbooks were very different. And so, and even today, there are some textbooks which are a bit more like audiolingual method still today, and other textbooks which are much more like advanced communicative language teaching. So methodology is very much something that you're considering when you're writing, selecting materials, aids, and so on. Planning, practice, and reflection. That's the actual teaching practice, actually what we do in the classroom. You should plan what you're going to do in the classroom, you have to do what you do in the classroom, and you should reflect upon what you do in the classroom, right? So that you come out of a class one day and you say, oh, that was a terrible class. I think I'll go and have a beer, 2 beers, 3 beers. But other times you come out of a class and you say, that really went well. I really feel pleased. Has anybody had that feeling today? Any of you had that feeling today? That class really went well? Yes, 1 or 2 people nodding. Yes, good. And what about the ones who felt that class was terrible? Anybody? No. And then we've got evaluation, of course. Evaluation. How are the students doing in learning English? How are we teachers doing in helping students learn English? I put 3 things in blue because they're all together in a sense with methodology. Approaches, methods and techniques, materials and aids which go together with them, and of course planning, practice and reflection, planning and practice in particular, which are based on the teacher's ideas about methodology and the materials that the teacher is using. The English language, there are ways of seeing it. The English language is not like a law, where a law is written so that it should have only one interpretation. Even then, there are arguments about interpretations of laws, but laws are written so that they cannot be seen in different ways. They cannot be interpreted in different ways. But a language is not like that. You can look at a language in many different ways. You can look at a language from the point of view of the Real Academia de la Lengua. Fortunately, in English, we don't have one. But even so, there are grammar books and dictionaries and so on. The Oxford English Dictionary, the complete Oxford English Dictionary is, I think, 20 volumes. And it has grammar in it as well as vocabulary, in fact. So you can look at language in terms of it's right, it's wrong. Fuistes? But I believe, actually, that fuistes was a common form among educated people in the 16th, 17th century. And so on. You know, because language has changed, but so you've got some people who look at language prescriptively. This is right and everything else is wrong. You've got other people who look at language structurally, and they say this is the way sentences are structured, and it has to be structured this way. And there are other people who look at language functionally, and they say the same idea can be expressed with different structures, different language forms. So there are many ways of looking at language. There's not just one way of looking at language. And the way you look at language is going to affect the way you teach if you're a teacher, or it will affect the way you train if you're a teacher-trainer. So ways of seeing it, systems and quirks, and of course language in discourse. Are you looking at language in terms of grammar exercises which the students get right and wrong, or are you looking at language in terms of communicative discourse, where there may be a few odd things in the discourse linguistically, but the discourse is working? And there will be some odd things in the discourse, even if the speaker is a native speaker, because native speakers handle the language slightly differently as well, and do slightly different things. So some people say he's older than I, and other people say he's older than me. And if you're a prescriptive person, you may have an opinion about that. Foreign language learning, research and theories. And again, over time, as you probably know, ideas of language learning have changed. and there's been more and more research. There was relatively little research until the 1950s, 60s, and since then research has really done a lot of work. And so we have theories of language learning which are based more on research than on intuition, logic, or whatever. And so what are the strongest language learning theories now? Well, we can go back to some of the old language learning theories. You remember them, don't you? Behaviorism, drilling, habit formation, don't let the students make mistakes, etc., etc. And what are the strongest language learning theories now, or combination of ideas about language learning? Very different from that. Now it's you have to make mistakes in order to learn. So rather than stopping students from making mistakes, we don't encourage them to make mistakes, but we allow them to, and those mistakes are information for us, the teacher, and they're a possible experience for the student when the student realizes for himself or herself that he or she has made a mistake. And so mistakes have a place in language learning. And they definitely have a place in first language learning, don't they? Anybody here got a child who says, ya poní mi zapato en quién sabe dónde? Children make mistakes, don't they, all the time, learning their first language. So mistakes certainly have a place, in an inevitable place, in first language learning, and people think they have a place here now. Applications of language learning. Okay, so we've got, as it were, background theory, language learning. We've got the nitty-gritty, approaches, methods, techniques, materials, aids, planning, practice, reflection, evaluation. How do background theory, ideas about language learning, how do background theory and evaluation connect with methodology? Okay, so again we've got the English language, we've got foreign language learning, we've got approaches, methods and techniques, we've got materials and aids, practice and evaluation. Well, depending on your ideas about the language, the methodology is going to be very different, isn't it? If your idea about language is it's a system of basically the essence of language is grammar, and the best way to look at grammar is structurally, how sentences are structured, and then you need vocabulary obviously for the grammar. That's going to affect your methodology compared with if your idea is functional grammar and lexis in discourse. And as you know, there is an approach which looks upon lexis as the essence of language, the lexical approach, looks upon lexis as the essence of language, and grammar is simply the cement. Grammar is the cement for the lexis to create meanings. And so, if you're on the left-hand side, your methodology is going to be quite different from someone who is on the right-hand side of their view of language. Okay? Foreign language learning. If you believe that the way people learn is models, imitation, habit formation, your methodology is going to be very different from if you believe that language learning works through exposure, communicative involvement, and noticing things. Does anybody know who started using the term notice as a kind of strategy for learning? Anybody know who it's associated with? No? A man called Ellis, Rod Ellis. Does Rod Ellis ring any bells for some people? Yeah. Rod Ellis was the person who started talking about noticing. When the person, the learner himself or herself, notices something that they hadn't noticed before, or notices something that's wrong that they hadn't noticed before. I studied Spanish at university, Spanish literature. And I lived in Spain for 2 years before I came to Mexico. And I married a Poblana. And so my Spanish, although I still have an accent, and I'm no doubt some features, British features, my Spanish has been pretty good for quite a long time. One day we were driving home, And I said, cuando llegamos a casa, vamos a tomar un té. We drink tea at 5 o'clock in our house. English tea with milk. When I go to England, I bring back a suitcase of tea. Not tea bags, loose tea, proper tea. And when I said it, I'd heard, and I'd studied it. I'd studied it when I studied Spanish, and I knew it once upon a time, and I'd forgotten it. And suddenly, llegamos? No, lleguemos, cuando lleguemos a casa. And that's noticing when maybe the teacher has told you 100 times. Let's face it, our students are told 100 times, 1,000 times about the verb to be on the simple present tense, aren't they? They're told 1,000 times about the verb to be in the simple present tense if they had English in primary school, in secondary school, in prepa, and again in tronco común. They haven't noticed. So noticing is that. Another bit of noticing that I remember in my own personal experience is bicycles. I said, yo cuando era niño iba a la escuela en bicicleta, vivía a 8 kilómetros de la escuela, iba todos los días en bicicleta. Except that I didn't say en bicicleta, I said a bicicleta. Because my mind was going, a caballo? A bicicleta. You know? And then one day again, I noticed. That's noticing. And so, some people think that the teacher's function in helping learning is to give models, get imitation, repetition, and create habits. Other people think that learning is communicative exposure, communicative involvement, and helping students notice things for themselves. And so, if you're on the left-hand side, your approach method is going to be very different from if you're on the right-hand side. Approaches and methods. Well, you put that and a few other things together, and you get grammar translation or PPP, or a combination of grammar translation and PPP. The teacher feels that his or her job is to explain and present and give models and get imitation and repetition and drill, etc., etc., etc. Plus skills practice, if you have time. Because most of your work is going to be on the language, isn't it? It's going to be on the grammar and vocabulary. And also, you're probably, because you're thinking these structural terms, structure 1, structure 2, structure 3, structure 4, in your program, in your syllabus, you're probably going to have a rigidly programmed course. You know by heart what comes in Unit 1, what comes in Unit 2, what comes in Unit 3, what comes in Unit 4. You know it by heart as a teacher. And so a rigidly programmed syllabus. If you're on the other side, you're going to be more on the lines of task-based learning. But real task-based learning, not the kind of, some people think task-based learning is kind of doing PPP with a task, whatever they think a task is. But task-based learning is really getting the students to use language communicatively, and then afterwards focus on the language as necessary. If there were no language problems, you've got nothing to worry about. If there were big language problems, you've got a lot to worry about and work on. And so people on this side will be thinking in terms of task-based learning, skills-based learning, communication-based learning. My French is pretty awful, and my hearing isn't very good now, so my hope for learning French well is finished. But I went to the Alianza Francesa a few years ago, and they put me on intermediate level. So I felt fairly happy with that. Well, at least I'm intermediate level, I'm not that bad. But I didn't want a course. So I found out what there was available, and what was available was conversation. And so I went into, I took 2 or 3 conversation courses, I think it was. And in a conversation course, it's communication-based learning or skills-based learning. And in the conversation course, obviously my listening was improving, my speaking was improving, and I was learning grammar and vocabulary although there was no grammar or vocabulary program. The teacher would simply help us if we had a grammar problem, if we had a vocabulary problem. So we didn't have a rigid program. We had a very flexible program. Conversation at intermediate level. In actual fact, some of them I think were advanced level. I think they actually called the course Advanced Conversation, but I was definitely intermediate. They needed me to make up the numbers, you know, to form a group. So again, if you're on that side, you're going to end up with something like that. If you're on this side with the background theory, language and learning, you're going to end up with something like this. Materials and aids. Materials and aids then support this. They consolidate the ideas and the approach that you have, because there are lesson plan textbooks. Unfortunately, most textbooks are lesson plan textbooks because the market demands them. And so you get lazy teachers. Page 1, exercise 1, exercise 2, exercise 3, exercise 4, page 2, exercise 5, exercise 6, page 3, and so on. And they come into class and they say, what was the last exercise we did last class? 7, teacher. Okay, exercise 8. So there are lesson plan textbooks. And these lesson plan textbooks are very much PPP textbooks. They are presentation, practice, production textbooks. A dialogue, focus on the grammar in the dialogue, and something supposedly communicative involving the language in the dialogue. Whereas if things are really communicative, you don't know what they're going to involve. You cannot predict the grammar of my next sentence. This is real communication. And you cannot predict the grammar of my next sentence. But in a PP textbook, you can. The grammar of the next sentence is going to be the grammar of the lesson. Not grammar as it comes in unpredictably and in all sorts of mixtures in real communication. If you're on this side, you'll have a teacher who will select material and do his or her own planning. So even if that teacher has to work with a specific textbook, that teacher will not go page 1, exercise 1, exercise 2, exercise 3, page 2, exercise 4, exercise 5, page. That teacher will not do that. That teacher will say, what do I want to do today? What did we do last class? Right, okay, so I've got to do a bit more work on that, and I want to create more confidence in speaking and this and the other, so I'll use this, and I'll use this, and I'll go to the internet, and I'll use that, and I'll use this, and I'll have etc. And so that teacher will have a very different approach from the other teacher. Are you all green teachers or red teachers here? And with practice, and by practice I mean teaching practice, you know, doing teaching, teaching practice. If you're on the red side, on the left-hand side, there are kind of right ways and wrong ways. And I've been in this as well. I've been teaching for, well, I don't teach now, but so, you know, for over half a century, and doing teacher training for a long, long time. And I remember in the Anglo, in the first teacher training courses that we had there, which was back in the late 1960s, 1970s, and basically it was situational language teaching, kind of, you know, communicative audiolingual teaching method. And there we had teachers who would have to come up in front of the class and do peer teaching. You know, the other trainees would be students, and the person would do the teaching. And that person who was doing the peer teaching had to follow set steps. You had to do this, and you had to do that, and you had to do something else, and you mustn't do that. And so the teacher would try to follow those steps, and every now and then, oh, damn, I forgot repetition. Oh, damn, I forgot whatever it was, you know, kind of. You have to follow a fixed sequence of steps. And at the end of the little bit of peer teaching, it will be analyzed. it was okay, but she forgot this. And she got those two the wrong way round, and the right way and the wrong way. If you're on this side, you look upon teaching much more in terms of principled reflection on teaching. There are principles. It's not that you can do anything. There are principles which guide what we do and what we don't do. And sometimes we experiment. We do something that we think we're told we shouldn't do, but we experiment with it anyway, and so on. But I wrote this last night, so I'm not sure this is what I wanted to write exactly, but anyway, it's more or less. But the teacher on this side is looking much more in terms of kind of seeing how it's going. So it's a bit more like driving in traffic in Mexico City or even in Puebla now, you know. You don't know exactly what route you're going to take down the road. You know, etc., etc. And blocked here, so you go off. So it's much more like driving. There are principles to driving, things you mustn't do, and things that are good to do, and so on. But this is not driving. This is kind of, you know, robot. Boom, 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 boom. Traffic. Boom. Accident. 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 And so reflective teaching, reflection on teaching, and autonomous development. This teacher may not think that they need to develop. The teacher on the left-hand side may feel that he or she doesn't need to develop. No, I took a teacher training program, licenciatura, 4 years. I know how to teach. And I will continue teaching that way for the rest of my life, my working life. And it works. My students learn English. Oh, where do you teach? Secundaria número 13. And your students learn English? I'd like to go and see. And evaluation. So we're connecting methodology and materials and practice with the background theory and with evaluation. Evaluation, if you're on the left-hand side, is language-focused achievement testing. Have they learnt the simple present tense? Yes or no? Have they learnt the comparative? Yes or no? Have they learnt adjective plus noun? Yes or no? And so you teach it in the lesson or the unit, and you test it at the end of the lesson or the unit. And if you're lucky, most of them have learnt it. The only problem is that a week later they've forgotten it. So they haven't really assimilated it or made it part of their repertoire. If you're on this side, your testing is going to be much more like communication-focused proficiency testing. Notice that international proficiency tests, most of them, have become much more communicative than they used to be. Even the Cambridge tests, which were a bit more communicative way back. For example, the Cambridge tests, PET, first certificate, well, first certificate is the oldest one, I think, first certificate and certificate of advanced English and so on, they don't have simply A, B, C, D answers in listening. Students have to write things in listening, which is much more like your real communication when if you're listening to something you take notes or whatever, etc., etc. TOEFL, until the end of the 20th century, was not very communicative, and it was all multiple choice, graded by computers. And then they had quite a long, about 10 years I think it took them, to get towards finally TOEFL IBT, which is much more communicative, on the lines of Cambridge. And so that's what it's all about. You can get students passing this kind of test, and they can't use English communicatively. But you get students passing Cambridge and TOEFL, new TOEFL, TOEFL IBT, TOEFL ITP is still a bit old-fashioned. They can communicate fairly well to a certain degree. And so, red or green. Rod Ellis. I mentioned Rod Ellis earlier. I knew him a little back in 1981. He's British. Back in 1981, he was doing his doctorate at the Institute of Education at the University of London. And I was beginning a doctorate, which I have never completed. I don't think I will now. I think I've got other things to do. So I knew him a bit, and he's been quite significant in research, especially research into classroom language learning, because a lot of research has been natural language learning, immigrants learning a foreign language in the country. And he published an article a few years ago when he was working in the United States. He's now in Australia, I think, in a university in Perth. He was at Cambridge, then he went to New Zealand, then he went to the United States, and now I think he's in Australia. And he published an article a few years ago, I can't remember the exact title of it, but it was something like 10 Principles for Language Teaching. And the introduction to the article said, I'm going to take a risk. Applied linguists don't like to stick their necks out and say, applied linguistics, applied to language teaching, language learning, applied linguists don't like to say, you should do this as a teacher, or you should do that as a teacher. They like to say, here's information, here's my theory, here's research, etc. You do what you like with it. And he said he thought that was a bit kind of chicken, or a bit kind of irresponsible, if you like, and that applied linguists should, in fact, give indications of how languages should be taught, or are best taught. And he had 10 principles, but I've just taken here 2 principles. Instruction needs to ensure that learners focus predominantly on meaning. So every class you have with students, every class your trainees have with students, should be dominantly focused on meaning, communication. Instruction needs to ensure that learners also focus on form. But when he's talking about focusing on form, he's not talking about the teacher explaining and drilling form, but about the teacher helping them notice how the present tense works, how the comparative works, and so on. And we're pretty lucky as English teachers in Mexico. Imagine being an English teacher in Turkey, or Jordan, or Indonesia, or Japan, or China, an English teacher there. English and Spanish have a great deal in common. They're Western European languages that use the same script, that have an enormous amount of vocabulary from the same roots, Latin, Greek, and neologisms, technical neologisms, etc., etc., etc. The grammar obviously has significant differences and so on, but there are quite a lot of things which are very similar in English and Spanish. Present continuous. Can't remember what you call the equivalent in Spanish, but I'm speaking English. Estoy hablando en inglés. French doesn't have anything like that. There's nothing like that in French. So if you want your students to learn the present progressive with French, you've got to work on it pretty hard. How it's formed and when it's used. Working on the present progressive with Spanish-speaking students is relatively simple. Okay, there are some differences, and there are some differences of usage, but the basic structure and the basic meaning is very, very similar. We often don't recognize that, and we make everything we teach the students an enormous challenge. Present progressive. Oh my God, present progressive. And we should be kind of saying, present progressive, if we mention the term present progressive, very similar in English and Spanish. Reported speech. Oh, reported speech, no me entra el reported speech. Look at formal. I mean, in actual practice, we don't necessarily follow the rules of reported speech. In actual communication, we don't always follow the rules of reported speech. But if you have the kind of rules of reported speech, they're very similar in English and Spanish. He said he lived in Puebla. Dijo que vivía en Puebla. He said he would not do it. Dijo que no la haría. Okay, the structure's different, but the actual kind of, the corresponding tenses are very similar. He said he hadn't done it. Dijo que no lo había hecho. Very similar. And we make our students' lives misery by kind of pretending that everything is a great complex mystery, which, if they light candles and pray, they may learn. So focus predominantly on meaning. Focus on language as well, and I'm not against PPP. In actual fact, the methodology book that I published with Oxford University Press, Success in English Teaching, has kind of communicative PP as the basis. But that book is actually written for secondary school teachers, and so methodology varies according to where you're teaching. And later on in the book, there's stuff on TBL and other alternatives. Ernesto Macaro, I'll pronounce it like that, Ernesto Macaro, because I believe he's British-born and British. He sounds like Ernesto Macaro, but he's actually Ernesto Macaro, Oxford University. He was in Mexico a few months ago. Principle 8, he has 8 principles. This is the last one. Underpins all other principles. So all the other 7 principles are subordinate to this principle. Principle 8. The principal focus of pedagogy should be on developing language skills. And therefore, the teaching of linguistic knowledge of grammar and vocabulary, should act in the service of skill development, not as an end in itself. And a lot of methodology, and a lot of books, it's all about grammar. Have you got the grammar right or wrong? And learning vocabulary, etc., instead of communication. So, and don't forget, of course, in the green area, don't forget Krashen. Don't forget Common European Framework, which is very much on the green side. In fact, they're pushing very strongly now, what's it called? English through subject teaching. I can't remember what it's called. Teaching subjects in English, communicative teaching of English through teaching maths in English, geography in English, and so on. They're pushing that strongly in European schools. Don't forget Cambridge. I told you Cambridge and TOEFL, IBT, they've all gone communicative. Theory, methodology, materials, practice, and types of training context. Okay, so we've looked at background theory, the language, learning theory. We've looked at aspects of methodology, approaches, methods, techniques, materials, aids, and actual classroom practice. Let's look at and evaluation. Who are the trainees? How long is the program? What are the target ELT contexts and the goals of the program? Well, it would be nice for everything to be green, although it's going to get pretty red with Trump, I believe. It would be nice for everything to be green, but we have different training situations. We have different trainees, we have different lengths of program, we have different ELT contexts where we expect our teachers to teach, and goals of the program. So who are the trainees? Do they begin with little or no English in the BWAP? Yeah? Low intermediate? Sometimes worse? Low intermediate or worse, beginning licenciatura in Enseñanza de Lenguas, or whatever it's called. In some Mexican universities it's a bit better, public universities. It's a bit better. In some Mexican universities, a bit worse probably. where, you know, you get students actually with no English. Well, you're taking a big risk, aren't you? If you're taking people and you're saying, register for this 4-year program, even if you speak almost no English. You're taking a risk, they're taking a risk. It's a bit irresponsible, really, isn't it? I mean, in a way you should say, if you want to take the licenciatura in English, we have intensive English courses in the Centro de Lenguas. Take intensive English courses in the Centro de Lenguas. When you get to minimum, absolute minimum B1 level, but preferably minimum B2 level, come and you can register for the licenciatura. It's quite irresponsible, really, isn't it? It's like, you know, letting people start to study medicine when they got 6 in biology in prepa. It's a bit like that, isn't it? Except, of course, that as English teachers, we don't usually kill people. Unlike doctors sometimes. We may drive a few people to suicide. So, who are the trainees? Little or no English? Well, you're going to have to take one approach with those trainees, aren't you? Or B2 English or above. Right, you can take a different approach with those teachers, can't you? Those trainees. And so your program, your training program is going to be different. And you may not be able to be quite so green with these people as you can be with these people in your training program, in your approach to language, in your approach to language learning, in your methodology. No ELT experience? Well, that would be common for most people, some ELT experience. You may have seen on my opening page, it said at the bottom that I'm only focusing on pre-service and early in-service training, not, you know, later in-service training. That's different. No idea of what ELT they want to do, or with a preference. If you've got people who come and you say, okay, you don't speak English, you have no ELT experience, but do you have any idea, any kind of feeling about whether you'd like to teach little children, older children, adults, anything different, university? No? It's kind of, you know, that's one kind of thing. And if you've got people who have preferences, it's another thing. And of course, you might say to some people, if they have preferences, you might actually say, well, quite honestly, I'll be frank with you, our program is not for you. If you're really interested in teaching little children, I wouldn't register for our 4-year program. I'd go to the Anglo and take a 6-month children's teaching course. No? I mean, the BUAP licenciatura, does it focus much on kindergarten teaching? Or even primary teaching? So it's going to be different. What you're going to do is going to be different depending on whether you've got people who just, you know, why have you registered for this program? I had nothing better to do. Or why have you registered for this program? I want to teach children English. Or I want to teach adults English, whatever. How long is the program? 20 to 100 hours? Does anybody here, or has anybody here, taught on short teacher training courses, like in Interlingua or Harmon Hall? Yes, a few people, right, yeah. Different ball game, isn't it? Different kettle of fish. You only take people like this. You're happy if you get people like this. And you're probably focused very clearly on adolescents and adults. Although I think maybe Harmon Hall and Interlingua have gone into children as well now, haven't they? Yeah, probably. So you know. So that's going to be a very different kind of program from this kind of program, 4 years. And then there are ones in between, you know, 250, 500 hours. You know, ICELT, I can't remember how long ICELT is, about 200 hours, I think, or 250 hours, something like that. So all of these things are going to affect what kind of methodology you're going to be working with. What are the target ELT contexts and the goals of the program? For our ELT center, Harmon Hall, Interlingua, or for any ELT context. You know what people have said about English for general purposes, EGP, versus English for specific purposes? They said English for specific purposes is English for specific purposes. And English for general purposes is English for nothing in particular. And it's a bit the same here, isn't it? You know, English for any ELT is, you know, English for, well, nothing in particular, really. And so, obviously, you've got goals here, competence with our methodology and materials for our teaching context. And Interlingua and Harmon Hall, I've observed quite a lot of classes in Interlingua and Harmon Hall and other language centers, the Anglo and so on. In the Anglo, I've observed thousands of classes. But at Harmon Hall and Interlingua. And you sometimes get people from universities who have the licenciatura, 4 years, and perhaps a maestria, and they're quite critical of Interlingua and Harmon Hall. And they kind of say, oh, Interlingua, you know, kind of, you know. But they're quite good, actually, because, would you say? They're quite good, actually, because they have to survive in the marketplace. They have to survive in the marketplace. They have to satisfy their customers. And so the way they do it is not necessarily the way I would do it, and the Anglo does it a bit differently, is a bit more flexible, I think, but they're pretty good at what they do. So they're very much, you know, kind of here, adolescents, now older children, adolescents and adults. It used to be adults, and then adolescents and adults, and then children, adolescents and adults. Short training course for their center, competence with their methodology and materials. So this, what we don't know, you actually need different courses, don't you? You need different training courses for bilingual primary. Bilingual primary, forget PPP totally. Bilingual primary, forget PPP totally, absolutely totally. It's classroom English, classroom activities and interaction in English. It's subjects in English. And you focus on language, as Rod Ellis said, you focus on language as necessary. And you may even have a plan, a kind of behind the thing, you may even have a plan. You know, this is going to be using the past tense a lot. This is going to be using comparatives a lot. But it kind of, the past tense and the comparative comes in because of the communication. It's not the communication comes in because, you know, the grammar point today is whatever it is. And so you need different training programs, different focus on language, on learning, and different methodology. Groups of 12. It's going to be different from groups of 50. Public secondary, language centers. In public universities, most public universities like the BUAP, and I've worked in many, giving training courses in many universities in Mexico. In general, you have a disastrous, I'm perhaps being a bit too strong, but a pretty disastrous English language teaching situation and a pretty good English teaching situation. You have tronco común or inglés curricular, 4 cursos, groups of 40, 50 students, and it's pretty disastrous, and the results are not good. And you've got language centers with students who register by level, smaller groups, etc. And university language centers tend to get pretty good results. And so you've got two different kind of things there. Elba said, I shouldn't be working. I'm 77 years old. And I shouldn't be working. But my wife lets me. And when she doesn't, I escape. I was retired. For a brief period I was retired. Then people started offering me projects and I couldn't resist. And so the one I'm working on at the moment, we've been working on it for 3 years now, is at the Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. And we've produced 6 books for the 6 semesters of Prepa. Well, they're not actually semesters now, they're called quadrimestres or something or other. I'm not sure. Was it, no, yeah, quadrimestres I think it is, because there are 3 in the year. No, they have one, yeah. But 6 books for the 6 periods of teaching for Prepa, and 6 books for licenciaturas. And we've taken a fairly green approach with the teacher, and we've had to do a lot of teacher training, because a lot of the teachers, when they were given this material, kind of said, but where's the lesson plan? You have to write the lesson plan. What? I can't do page 1, exercise 1, exercise 2, exercise 3, page 2, exercise 4. No, you have to write your lesson plans with the material that we're providing you. And so we've had to do quite a lot of teacher training. This is in-service training, because almost all the teachers at the university are graduates of the licenciatura there. And the reason why we wrote the books was because Rectoría and El Patronato wanted to write books. They're a bit kind of empresarial. They have a farm and they sell quite good cheese. And they have buses that go between the different places and so on. They make a bit of money out of things. Well, the university as well has a gasolinera, no? Is it like the gasolinera of the university and so on? Yeah. And so actually I think the Rectoría and Patronato were looking upon it largely as a kind of, we could make some money out of this. But when we started working on it, we said, well, what we've got to do here is we've got to produce material and methodology which is appropriate for our student population. International textbooks don't know what the student population is. The best-selling international textbooks are sold in Mexico, Germany, Turkey, Indonesia, Japan. They don't know what the native language of the students is. They don't know what the exact age is. They don't know who the students are. And we said, we do know. We know that our Prepa students are University of Hidalgo Prepa students, 16 to 19, 15 to 19 years old, usually with pretty bad experiences of English at school. We don't want to repeat school English. Spanish as their native language, a few of them with maybe Nahuatl and Otomí. In higher basic education, with the possibility of going on to higher education, we've got a fairly well defined student population. So we want to think in terms of materials and methodology for these students. And when we get to university, we've got now students of the Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. They're all Hidalgo and some from outside. They're, 18 to 24, 25 years old. Most of them have had pretty bad experiences of English in secondary and Prepa. Prepa we hope will change with the new approach. We don't want to repeat secondary and Prepa English in Tronco Común. Are you repeating Prepa, secondary and Prepa English in Tronco Común? Well, so we need to think in terms of materials and methodology, which is different from Prepa and secondary, which is appropriate for our students whose native language is Spanish, who are this age, who have this background, etc., etc. So here's just one example from this is book 1. This is book 1. Unit 1. Book 1, Unit 1. Not page 1. It's not page 1, don't worry. It's actually page 10. It's page 10. And so we have a section in every unit, which is English for your, it should be for your studies and professional. Look at the list of general academic professional fields, typical names of faculties and schools in institutions of higher education, and BA or BSc degrees in them. Find your degree course or add it. Agriculture and environment. Agriculture, agribusiness, forestry, environmental science. Arts, graphic design, visual arts, music, dance. Construction and engineering, architecture, civil engineering, and you're looking for yours. Economics and management, economics, administration, accounting, electronics and computer systems, electronic engineering, health sciences, medicine, nursing, dentistry, nutrition, psychology, humanities and social sciences, sociology, education, history, law, linguistics, or other, if your area is something else. I said before, English and Spanish are so similar, especially when you get to formal English. And our university students, they don't need, most of them will never leave Mexico. Most of our university students will never leave Mexico. If they use English, they'll use it in Mexico. Some of them will, but most of them won't. They won't need English for hanging out with their friends in English. They won't need English for everyday life in English. And yet our textbooks very often kind of suggest that's what they need English for. No, they don't. They need more formal English. Look at the vocabulary and think of Spanish equivalents. Very similar, isn't it? Exercise 2. Look at the following extracts. Read them and in pairs relate them to the different fields of study. The excessive and inappropriate use of antibiotics has increased antimicrobial resistance and reduced the effectiveness of drugs for the treatment of common diseases like tuberculosis, malaria, cholera, dysentery, and pneumonia. Health sciences. You don't need to know any English at all to recognize that as a little text in the field of health sciences. No English at all, you could recognize it. Convention on the Rights of the Child, approved in the United Nations in 1989, is still just a document and not a reality in many countries where children are considered the property of their parents with no special human rights. That's a bit more difficult, but probably social sciences, right? Humanities and social sciences. Gestalt theory helps explain the visual and psychological impact of images. Most effective logos and symbols are based on one or more of the Gestalt principles of similarity, continuation, closure, proximity, and figure and ground. Graphic design, arts, and so on. So, in the final analysis, you need to, as far as possible, know who your trainees are and stuff about them, what they want to teach English for, or what you want them to teach English for, how long you have, 20 to 100 hours, 250 to 500 hours, 4 years, etc. And then you can start deciding on methodology and what aspects of language you're going to cover with them, what aspects of learning you're going to cover with them, what kind of materials you're going to recommend to them, cover and recommend to them, what kind of methodology and so on. And there's the last one, a little bit of discussion. Very briefly, answer the following questions about your undergraduate course. Discuss the answers in pairs. What is the name of your degree course? How many students are there in their semester? In page 1 to 9, this language was covered. Are some courses very difficult? Who teaches the different subjects? Where is your faculty or school located? Do you have foreign classmates? The methodology and materials and practices covered in an English teacher training program and recommended by it should vary according to the length of the program, characteristics of the trainees, the target ELT context and goals of the program. But it should tend towards the views of language, language learning and language teaching practice most supported by research and leading experts, not towards failing ideas and failing teaching. Unfortunately, we train many teachers for generally hopeless ELT. It's a sad fact. Thousands and thousands and millions of people in Mexico study English, and thousands learn it. And we're training teachers for that. We're training teachers for hopeless ELT. And we're extending that hopeless ELT. It used to be in secondary and prepper, now it's in primary, secondary and prepper. It's like, you can't have too much of a good thing, but you definitely can have too much of a bad thing. Thank you. Any questions, comments, observations? Can we have lights? If we've got lights? Yeah. My hearing is terrible, so I'm probably going to have to ask you to repeat it several times. Or I'll come up closer.
Just a comment.
Hold it. Yeah.
I consider it's a comment. Both the traditional way and innovative way, or for example, not follow the rules.
Yeah.
For example, for me, it's we can deny the effectiveness about both approaches.
Yeah. I think if you have time like 4 years, you want to cover all aspects of ways of looking at language, and you want to focus on the most appropriate way of looking at language now, because of what we know about language now that we didn't know 50 years ago. And the most appropriate way of looking at language may be with children and with adults. You need to look at language learning, and you need to look at different approaches to language learning, and you need to focus on the strongest theories at the moment, but also consider, but is it language learning with young children or with older children, with adults, with professionals, in large groups, in small groups, etc. And so if you have time, you cover everything. Traditional methodology, alternative methodology, and you focus in on what? If you don't have that time, you have to focus in on things and forget some of the other stuff. Anybody else? Okay.
You mentioned international books are not adapted for the context, but why really cares this fact?
My criticism of international books?
Why it's
Well, I go to England every year, and I do it partly because I have written some international books and earned some money. But publishers and authors, publishers want to sell as many books as they can wherever they can. And they want books which can be printed and sold by the 1,000 or million, not by the 1,000 or 100. It's not economically feasible. And so basically, publishers pay no attention to some of the strongest movements in English language teaching today, like learner-centered teaching. You cannot be learner-centered in a book if you're writing your book for Mexico, Brazil, Japan, Turkey, Germany. That cannot be learner-centered. And so it's an economic market fact that international textbooks will continue to be international textbooks, but possibly modern technology, access to textbooks, electronic access to textbooks, etc., may allow for more regional and more focused textbooks. Yep.
Well, first of all, nice to meet you. My name is Ivan, and I work for Universidad Veracruzana.
Uh-huh.
And
Jalapa, Veracruz?
yes.
Jalapa.
Well, no, Orizaba.
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 My daughter lives in Córdoba.
Yes, I think she was your student before. And, well, I'm really interested in the field of teaching training, because actually I do teaching training, and I also teach.
Yeah.
And I have taught at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have seen throughout all these years is that we cannot stay with one single trend.
Mm-hmm.
We have to see towards the future and also the past.
Yeah.
Why? Because we have to make a combination, depending on the context, depending on the needs of your students, depending on what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
And also this trend of testing,
That's right.
which has become more functional
Yeah.
rather than focusing on form.
Yeah.
And I feel, or I would compel everybody, to continue to go
Yeah.
on. We cannot stay.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
With what you have.
Yeah, I agree entirely.
Yes, yes.
I said, we're talking about textbooks. I said, international textbook writers pay no attention to one of the strongest movements in language teaching, which is learner-centered teaching. And in teacher training, we should be just as conscious of something that is a very strong movement in language teaching, which is learner autonomy, developing learner autonomy. So one of the things we should be doing when we're training teachers is developing teacher autonomy, so that they can develop as they move from workplace to workplace, and as time goes by and things change.
And actually, when you give teaching training, you have to let the people that are learning from you or that are seeking for your help.
Yeah.
You have to focus also on their context.
Yeah.
Because if you tell them, I would do it this way, I would do it this way.
That's right.
But what would you do?
Yeah.
How do you think you can approach?
There are many ways to kill a cat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What I teach them is not going to be black and white.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I agree entirely. Anything else? Okay, well, we're going to meet again probably, we're going to meet again on tomorrow. And so if you have any questions, if any questions occur to you between now and tomorrow. Yes?
You were talking about evaluation, but not assessment.
Yeah.
Sorry, but not at all.
Yeah.
Also, you were talking about skills, but not abilities.
I don't really want to get into what we call in English nitpicking, which is, kind of little details.
Yeah, because it's different, the ability and the skill. And we have to
well,
in our students
but
the ability.
I'm really, I have to say, I'm not really interested in the distinction. I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but it's, there's a tendency, just in this topic, we have teacher training, teacher development, teacher formation, and some people devote their life to the difference between teacher training and teacher formation. I'm not interested. Frankly, I have better things to do. And one of the problems with assessment and assessment, evaluation, testing, is that you go to different books, experts in different universities define them differently. And so, we get into kind of,
Because if we have this assessment since the beginning with our students, we can know what is the problem with these guys.
Yeah, but assessment, evaluation,
You're the same.
For me, it's the same.
We have different writers.
No. Your assessment and your evaluation is the same. You're saying if we assess them before we teach. So your definition of well, that's what you just said, no? Yeah. So your definition of assessment is what? What you do before you teach?
Yeah, before.
In evaluation of what you do after you teach? Why can't it be? Why can't you evaluate your students' English before you teach?
Listening comprehension.
But why can't you? Why can't you? Why does it have to be?
No, why should I? No, why can't? Why should I do it? Because I don't know if these students produce or not produce, and if they produce or not correctly.
Yeah. No, but it's a distinction between assessment and evaluation. I'm really not interested. I'm sorry.
Well, everybody, thank you very much for being here tonight. We hope to see see you tomorrow very early, and please don't miss all the English seminar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No,